I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is episode 10 of my series on the JFK assassination. I want to talk to you today about the importance of an autopsy. The purpose of an autopsy is to determine the cause of death. In a homicide case, you have a physician that's known as a forensics pathologist who makes a careful examination of the body. He examines the entry points for bullets, the exit points, the trajectories, and he is determining the cause of death. If he happens to find bullet fragments in the body by taking x-rays and then retrieving the fragments, he carefully preserves those, places them in an envelope, and then when he hands them over to some law enforcement official, that official must sign for it and date it, and then when he transfers it to the next person or the records division, that person's got to sign for it. And the whole idea is that an autopsy can be an extremely important part of a criminal prosecution. That, for example, if the prosecutor wishes to introduce into evidence the bullet fragment that the pathologist found, he will call the pathologist to the stand to identify the bullet fragment, and then he will call to the stand every single person that handled that bullet fragment in order to establish what the law calls a chain of custody. And the idea is that if he cannot do that, if the prosecutor cannot do that and there is a break in the chain of custody, the judge will not permit the evidence to be admitted because there is too much risk of tampering during that break. So an autopsy can be a very important part of a criminal prosecution. The prosecutor might call the pathologist to the stand to establish the entry points for the bullets, the exact cause of death, and with the idea that this is going to buttress the case against the accused. He might also later bring in a fingerprint expert to testify that the gun that fired that particular fragment that was found near the scene contained the fingerprints of the defendant. And all of this is circumstantial evidence that's being used to convict the accused. And again, as I stated in a previous episode, circumstantial evidence in the law is just as valid as direct evidence. And so, obviously, law enforcement agencies of different jurisdictions sometimes work together to bring a person to justice. That's why it's extremely strange, bizarre even, that team of Secret Service agents at Dallas Parkland Hospital would do what they did. When Dr. Earl Rose, who was one of the most renowned forensics pathologists in the country, started to do an autopsy on President Kennedy's body, which Texas law required to be done in any homicide case, the team of Secret Service agents told him in no uncertain terms that they were not going to permit him to do that. And when Rose stood his ground and said, "You're not taking this body out of this hospital until I perform this autopsy," that team of Secret Service agents said, "We're operating under orders." They pull their coats back, brandishing their guns, and which is essentially threatening to use deadly force against anybody who gets in their way. So it's very strange, because ordinarily you would expect law enforcement agencies to work together. I mean, presumably they were going to be bringing somebody or some people in who had committed this murder. And so you would have expected the Secret Service to say, "Dr. Rose, we understand you have to do this, and so go ahead and do what you need to do. We'll stand by. As soon as you're finished, we will take the body back to Washington with us." That's not what happened. They forced their way out of there. And they took the body to Air Force One, where Lyndon Johnson, the new president, was patiently waiting for it so that he could take it back to Andrews Air Force Base and then deliver it into the hands of the military. Now, when we jump ahead to the autopsy that was conducted by the military, now keep in mind that it was totally secret, that all the participants were sworn to secrecy. They were forced to sign secrecy oaths. They were threatened with severe action, court-martial, criminal prosecutions. You'll recall John Stringer saying, the photographer saying, "They put the fear of God in us." But as the information started getting released about the autopsy beginning in the late mid-1970s with the House Select Committee on Assassination's reinvestigation of the Kennedy assassination, and then later the avalanche of information that got released in the 90s with the Assassination Records Review Board, people began examining what was going on here, and they discovered the testimony that had been taken before the House Select Committee. They started talking to the participants, the enlisted men who had brought the body in through the back of the morgue early at 6:35 p.m. As compared to the official bringing it in at 8 p.m. and the 2 brain examinations, the things that we've discussed. But one thing in all of this appears painfully clear, that during this entire autopsy, with all the shenanigans that were going on, no one ever expressed any concern about a criminal prosecution or about the possibility of a criminal prosecution. In fact, by the time they started the autopsy, the law enforcement agents in Dallas had already taken a suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, into custody. So presumably there's going to be a criminal case. Do you think anybody during this autopsy says, hey, what if we get called to testify? How are we going to explain this? Like, remember when Colonel Fink was getting ready to dissect the neck wound and somebody came over who was clearly outranking him, a general or an admiral or somebody in a suit like CIA, said, don't touch that wound. Fink didn't say, hey, but wait a minute, what about a criminal case? What am I going to say when the prosecutor calls me to the stand to testify? Or how do they establish the chain of custody on the body? The body itself is evidence. Do they get up on the stand and perjure themselves by saying the body left Air Force One and proceeded out to the front and just stayed out there until 8 p.m., knowing that there's enlisted men saying we snuck the body in at 6:35 p.m., and then you've got the Gawler's funeral home report that says we brought the body in a body bag, which the military used as compared to the sheets that the body had been wrapped up when it left Dallas. The autopsy photographs that Sandra Spencer says those are not the ones I developed. I mean, this is a death penalty case in Texas. It was going to be a state murder case, and you can be assured that the defendant would have had a high-powered legal defense team that would have been pulling all these things out. I mean, and it's very possible to subpoena these people. They're out of state, but there's a procedure for subpoenaing out-of-state witnesses. Nobody in this autopsy expresses even one iota of concern for the possibility of a criminal case. In fact, you almost get the impression that they absolutely knew that there was never going to be a criminal case at all. So the question obviously arises, how could they be so certain that there was never going to be a criminal prosecution in this case?